worst abomination of all. Notice Ezekiel 8, verse 16. Then he said to me, have you seen this, O son of man? Turn again, you will see greater abominations than these. So he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house. And there, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men with their backs toward the temple of the Lord and their faces toward the east, and they were worshiping the sun towards the east. What was the greatest abomination that was being committed among those who professed to be God's people? They were worshiping what? They were worshiping the sun. Does that have any end time significance? It most certainly does. We're going to study that later on. Verse 17. And he said to me, have you seen this, O son of man? Is it a trivial thing to the house of Judah to commit the abominations? Notice the word again, the abominations which they commit here. For they have filled the land with violence. Then they have returned to provoke me to anger. Indeed, they put the branch to the nose. In other words, they snubbed their nose at the Lord. Therefore, I also will act in fury. My eye will not spare, nor will I have pity. Though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, I will not hear them. God is saying this about His beloved bride who has become a harlot and has adopted the abominations of the nations and is proud of all of her wonderful jewels and fornicates with the kings of the earth. This is not some pagan nation. God is rebuking His bride, His wife. Now let me ask you, were there faithful people in Jerusalem? Was everybody apostate? Was everybody a harlot? Absolutely not. Before the destruction of the city, did God say that He was going to do a work of separating the righteous from the unrighteous? A judgment? Absolutely. Ezekiel chapter 9. Ezekiel chapter 9 and verse 1. Then He called out in my hearing with a loud voice saying, let those who have charge over the city draw near, each with a deadly weapon in his hand. In other words, these messengers are coming to execute God's judgment. And suddenly 6 men came from the direction of the upper gate, which faces north, each with his battle axe in his hand. In other words, with a weapon in his hand, because they're going to execute God's wrath upon this unfaithful wife who has broken the marriage covenant. One man among them was clothed with linen and had a writer's inkhorn at his side. In other words, he had a seal. They went in and stood beside the bronze altar. Now the glory of the God of Israel had gone up from the cherub where it had been to the threshold of the temple. And he called to the man clothed with linen who had the writer's inkhorn at his side. And the Lord said to him, go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and put a mark. Where? Is there a mark in Revelation on the forehead? Absolutely. Put a mark on the foreheads of the men who what? Sigh and cry over all the abominations that are done within it. Was everybody worshiping the sun? No. There were some faithful ones that were not worshiping the sun. And what is told to this man who has the writer's inkhorn is, put a seal on those who are not practicing the abominations, those who are not worshiping the sun. Do you see the contrast between the sun worshipers and those who have the mark on their foreheads? Very interesting. Notice verse 5. To the others he said in my hearing, go after him through the city and kill. That's after the sign of protection has been placed. Go after him through the city and kill. Do not let your eyes spare, nor have any pity. Utterly slay old and young men, maidens and little children, and women, but do not come near anyone on whom is the mark. And begin at my sanctuary. That is where the ministers were. So they began with the elders who were before the temple. The punishment began with the religious leaders because they led God's people into idolatry and into these practices. And this was fulfilled. This punishment was fulfilled when Nebuchadnezzar came and destroyed the city of Jerusalem and took the people captive. Let's read about it in 2 Chronicles chapter 36 and verses 15 through 18. It says there, and the Lord God of their fathers sent warnings to them by His messengers, rising up early and sending them because He had compassion on His people and on His dwelling place. But they mocked the messengers of God, despised His words, and scoffed at His prophets. until the wrath of the Lord arose against his people, till there was no remedy. Therefore, he brought against them the king of the Chaldeans, who killed their young men. Do you remember Ezekiel chapter 9? Don't spare. Kill young men, maidens, kill children, everything. Notice what it says, verse 17. Therefore he brought against them the king of the Chaldeans, who killed their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, had no compassion on young man or virgin, on the aged or the weak. He gave them all into his hand. Is this a sad story? This is a very sad story. In other words, Israel fulfilled the prophecy of Ezekiel 16 and Ezekiel 23 and became a harlot, and therefore the husband destroyed them. Of course, this could never happen to the Christian church. Do you think?